a year in review here that you weren't part of, and so we'll be looking at some of your wanting to cover over some of your priorities going forward and strategic intentions in the coming year or so. So I invite you to make some introductory remarks, and then we'll throw it open to for questions from the members.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity so early to have the opportunity of meeting with you and discussing things. I have been in the role 4 weeks, so I'm not going to assert that I'm an expert, but I have a reasonable understanding. So I just want to introduce on my right-hand side, Rebecca Kittredge, who is one of my statutory deputy commissioners, and on my left, Heather Baggett, who very ably acted as the Public Service Commissioner whilst I was otherwise engaged. So, Heather.
I'm just going to make some brief opening remarks, if that's okay. So the last year for the public service can be characterised as a rapid shift in our context and operating environment. Of course, when a new government is elected, the public service needs to move quickly to alter course and implement new policies and priorities, and the public service did this seamlessly. A major focus for the Commission this past year has been supporting that government transition process and ensuring the public service is focused on the policy priorities of the government. The public service also entered an environment of greater fiscal constraint. So in that context, we've made quite great strides in the past year. We played a key role in that transition period, supporting the government's 100-day plan. We provided advice and guidance to agencies on integrity and neutrality in the lead up to the election, during the election and the post-election period. It's a critical part of our role. During the formation of government negotiations, the Commission managed requests from the coalition parties for information from public service agencies, which is an important part of our democratic process. We also have played a key role in introducing new performance and delivery measures in line with the government's priorities and new targets. We had a lead role in implementing the Fiscal Sustainability and Effectiveness Program to reduce expenditure and find savings. Like all agencies, the Commission needed to find savings to align its work program to the government priorities. We were asked to find 7.5% in savings and plan to manage our future cost pressures within baseline, and we achieved this. We reduced a number of senior leadership roles. The details of that included in your pack quite substantially, and in total 25 roles are disestablished in the Commission, and we offered voluntary redundancies in some cases. On top of that, we've looked at achieving efficiencies in our agency. We found about 1 million per annum by reviewing our non-personnel expenditure. You'll be aware a long-standing concern for successive governments has been expenditure on consultants and contractors, and the Commission this year has worked with all agencies to help them reduce the spend to achieve the government's target of reduction by 400 million. The public service is well on track to achieve that target. The Commission itself reduced our own expenditure in this area by 34%, about 1.4 million. As a total share of the total workforce spend, our public service spend on contractors and consultants now sits at 8.9%, which is down from 13.1% last year. In our core work, that continues as the employer of chief executives. The Commission runs the process for appointment and reappointment of chief executives, and this year we've had a number of those and some large roles, including DPMC, MFAT, Social Investment and Treasury. We've also supported a number of important statutory roles, their appointment processes, for example, the new Chief of Defence, the 3 new service chiefs, the new Public Service Commissioner and the new Police Commissioner. We've also, in line with the government's expectations, strengthened our approach to Chief Executive Performance Management, aligning it to their targets and priorities. We've completed 3 agency performance improvement reviews, Pacific Peoples, Inland Revenue Transport, to reflect the government's priorities for the public service. And finally, we've provided advice on a number of machinery of government changes, namely the establishment of the Ministry for Regulation, the Social Investment Agency, the Crown Response Office, and the new Charter School Agency. So that's just a quick snapshot of key work this past year. Happy to take questions. Just want to quickly mention to the committee, we have members of our leadership team here from the Commission as well, who can ask further questions around specific areas if that's the committee's wish.
Right, okay, thank you. We've got Camilla Velich to start with, and then I'll go to Frank, and then Andy, and then Tom.
Thank you very much for your introductory comments, and also congratulations. It's a very important role, and I'm pleased to see you in that position. The question I have is in relation to the substantive cuts that we've seen in roles across the public service. I understand around 10,000 roles being cut. How do you see, as a Public Service Commission, those cuts will directly affect the provision of core services directly to New Zealanders?
So in terms of the numbers, the numbers that we're seeing aren't that high. So year to date, across the public service, we've seen a net increase, so that's to 30th of June, of 0.7%. The main reduction has happened in the last 6 months, of course. Agencies started reducing the size of the workforce in line with the expectations of the incoming government, and there were further cuts as a result of the budget. Just in terms of those numbers, so the reductions in 3 areas: the budget expectations of government, where 1.5 billion in savings was found. End of fixed term funding, so reduction as a result of those programs coming to an end. And the third area is the government agencies seeking to find efficiencies. So just taking the budget, that removed 2,250 roles and closed another 1,150 vacancies. So on top of that, there would have been ended roles from programs coming to end in efficiencies. I don't have those numbers on us. This financial year, a total of 865 redundancies occurred, and about half of those were voluntary. So those are the numbers that we're dealing with. Each chief executive takes responsibility for assessing their capability and their workforce adjustment to meet their service requirements, and for discussing with the minister what the shift in their work program and priorities are commensurate with the resourcing they have available to them. We're confident that chief executives have done that and done that well.
So the question was, sorry, Madam Chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, supplementary. The question really was the provision of core services. So is the answer from the Public Service Commission really that the responsibility for that lies with chief executives, and that you don't hold information in relation to how those core functions might be delivered?
Not in detail, but across the board, we do collect performance information on how well agencies are doing. There are some areas that we do have concerns more broadly about capability in the public service, expectations on from New Zealanders to uptake digital technology, for example, is an area we would say we continue to focus on how we build that capability. But more broadly, services continue to be provided to New Zealanders every day. There are areas, of course, that are subject to the government targets where the government wants to shift and improve those services and outcomes.
Just final supplementary. On those core roles that you said where you do have concerns, you've mentioned information technology. What are the other core provision of services that you have concerns about the delivery of from the public service, given all that background information?
Well, with any provision of services, the allocation of resources is key. So there's always trade-offs that you need to make. My comment about digital and IT was more broadly public service capability in areas that we know that we've got more work to do. And that's an area that I've just particularly highlighted where there's significant IT programs happening across the government. It's an area we've tended to rely on insourcing of contractors and consultants to support us, and it will continue to be so going forward.
Okay, I've got a sub here from Tim Costley on that.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure just on the question of redundancies and things, I wanted to make sure I heard that right, because the assertion was 10,000. What you're saying is not even 10% of that, not even 1,000 redundancies. Have I heard that correctly?
Yeah, as at 30 June, 865 redundancies across the public service. About half of those are voluntary. Those are the latest numbers. So some of the change processes across the public service are still ongoing. So we expect those numbers will come up, and we've got new data that comes out next week, which will give the latest. But yes, 10,000 is not anywhere near the numbers.
To clarify, the question was about roles. So redundancies reflect actual people and roles, not necessarily.
Correct, but perhaps a number way out of scope. But just to come to something you do have responsibility for, which is your own commission. I looked at your numbers. I think it's only 3 redundancy payments made in the year in question. I did have one question in your response to written questions. 174, you said that there are 5 deputy commissioner positions disestablished, but in your annual report, it says it's gone from 7 to 4. Can you help me just clarify? Are there 2 different ones created? Is that perhaps it?
Sorry, so we slightly confusing because we have 2 statutory deputy commissioners, and then we also had non-statutory deputy commissioners, which we're now calling deputy chief executives. So there were 7 of the non-statutory
Deputy chief
that were
executives.
reduced down to 4.
Yeah, so
Correct.
there were 7 deputy chief executives for an
Yes.
organisation of 200 people.
And we reduced that down to 4.
Yeah, okay, that I get that does make sense when you put it into context. And finally, your reduction of 25 people overall, that obviously doesn't include the 37 from the social wellbeing agency that transitioned to the social investment.
No, it doesn't, sorry, because that's counted as a separate departmental
Yeah, that's
agency.
a separate
Correct,
account.
and
Okay.
now separated into a separate agency now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, that's helpful.
Thanks, Tim. Francisco Jimenez.
Thank you, Chair. And welcome to the role.
Thank you.
Commissioner. One of the functions of the Public Service Commission is to support public service neutrality. And in the strategic directions, one of the outcome here says public servants have a good understanding of what it means to be a politically neutral public servant, are confident that their organizations, people get jobs based on merits, and are confident that their organizations are free and frank in their advice to ministers. One of the things that you've done since you've come in is when a staff member offered free and frank advice to a minister in an internal email, you called that comment unprofessional. I'm interested to test on what advice you sought before you made that decision to call that advice unprofessional.
The wording was completely unprofessional.
Can you
There was
define?
never any question about the need for neutrality in the public service. That is something I hold very dearly. If you go back, and maybe it wasn't worded as well as it should have, but the nature of the language used by that official was unacceptable and unprofessional, and I stand by that.
But surely internal remarks, staff should be able to express themselves with a lot more freedom and a lot more, free and frank. That's the nature of the.
That's not in question, but the nature of the language defines the values, and I thought it was a very inappropriate use of language. I maintain that position,
But
but it does not in any way compromise independence or neutrality of the public service. What I'm saying, that is an article of faith, but how you discharge it goes to the professionalism and conduct, and that breached it.
And just to clarify, though, you didn't seek any advice.
I did seek advice,
You
but
did
that
seek
was
advice.
my decision. It was
Yeah.
under my name, and I stand by it.
You understand that organizations such as the Public Service Association have disagreed with your interpretation of the facts.
The fact that somebody disagrees doesn't mean it's incorrect. We just have a different view.
What's the
I
difference?
hold my view, and I don't consult with the PSA before I form my judgments.
So you
No.
don't consult with the PSA.
I do not consult with people unless I think it's necessary. It was not necessary, and I maintain that position.
So do you think public service neutrality is a two-way street? So for example, we've had examples over the past month of ministers naming and attacking public servants in the House. So why is it that there's a double standard? It seems that the government ministers are allowed to attack public servants, but but they're not defended when they are attacked.
I don't speak for ministers. I speak for the public service.
Do you think that's inappropriate though?
I don't have a strong view. I think what we as the public service need to do is avoid the situation where ministers feel that they are compelled to do that. We got it wrong in this case.
So you don't have a strong view on ministers naming and attacking public servants?
I would
in the House?
prefer if we could avoid it altogether,
Right.
but human beings are human beings.
Okay, I've got a sub here from Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Tom
Chairman.
Rutherford.
My question would be around the relevance of that line of questioning with this being the annual review to 30 June 2024 and understanding the differentiation between what you're saying as the Public Services Commissioner around your responsibility to consult with people. In this sense, you made a decision of the belief in your role that you hold, but also comparing then those responsibilities, say, of a member of parliament who has the ability to speak freely and frankly when debating in the debating chamber and in the House. So delineating that between the line of questioning that you've just received from my colleague.
Point of order.
Oh,
All questions are through the chair. The chair allowed the questions, and so your query should be directed to the chair if you've got an objection.
No, my question is to the Commissioner around what responsibility he has for things that were prior to 30th of June 2024, which is what this annual review is focused on, and things that have happened since that date.
in a technical sense, I have no responsibility before the 4th of November, but I do have a responsibility to maintain the integrity of the public service.
And have you felt that it has been an expectation of you that you should consult with organisations like the PSA, for example, when you're making decisions regularly?
I would consult with any third party if I thought their opinion was relevant to something that I was making a decision on. As I said previously, I did not believe that to be the case. I have met with the Public Service Association. We had a very open and frank discussion. That matter was not raised with me.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you, Commissioner, you've made it clear. Forgot any subs on that? Well, otherwise I'll go to Andy Foster.
Okay, right. So three questions if I can. First of all, congratulations again. The first one of those, just picking up the one on savings. So what you're telling us is that there's been a significant reduction in headcount, whether it's some of its vacancies or some of its actual real headcount, and in consultants and contractors, and still able to deliver the services which are expected.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and then and I would hope going forward there is an ongoing focus not just in response to ministers but also within the public sector to say, well, how can we do our job more effectively, more efficiently? So if there's an identification of savings opportunities or efficiency opportunities within the public sector, that the public sector will say, hey, we think we should do this differently.
We think that's a very important element of the general expectation of improving performance across the public sector.
Good.
It's something I'm applying my mind to with chief executives.
Oh,
now.
good. Okay, and look, the second area is that one of neutrality which has been raised. Generally speaking, I think that's absolutely right. I think odd feelings that maybe it's a perception one, that there is some pushback at times from parts of the public sector or individuals within the public sector on the direction that the government is taking, possibly because people, and it's a distinction between professionalism and personal opinion. I don't particularly agree with particular directions.
That's not something I've experienced in my time here, but I understand that people have individual views, which they're entitled to. When they are in the job of being a public servant, they're there to give effect to government policy.
And that has to be professional with the advice that they give.
And if it is too difficult for individuals, then they should take other options.
And look, and the last one is just the one of culture, and it's in the annual report. There's some research, and it's been reasonably consistent over an extended period of time in terms of sort of satisfaction, etc. It's things like treats people with respect 68%, treats people fairly 61%.
Yeah.
So those kind of numbers. Now that suggests there's a large number of people who are not feeling that they're being treated with respect or treated fairly. And you know, travelling around New Zealand, I'm getting a lot of people saying, it's both central and local government, saying that they are feeling that it is more bureaucracy than public service, which is not there to help, but there to hinder. And I guess the question I'm asking to you is your role in trying to make sure we've got a culture which is helping New Zealanders to be the best that we can be collectively.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I'm with others. We need to change those perceptions. We need people to have confidence and trust that when they engage with the public sector and the public service, that they do so as an equal part and that they are satisfied with that. But like any service business, from time to time, people have bad hair days and it doesn't always go as well as it should. We accept that, but we have to improve. And I think, you know, maintaining the confidence and trust of the government institutions is a very important global factor at the moment, and it's been under pressure in recent years.
I wish you well in doing that.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Foster. I'm going to go to Camilla Millett.
Thank you. I had a question around the Commission's responsibilities in relation to pay equity. Given the disestablishment of the Pay Equity Task Force, but the continuing responsibility you have, and you've mentioned in your document around your strategic intentions for being responsible for settling pay equity claims, I wanted to know what work was undergoing and what resources you had deployed to address pay equity claims, And also additionally, if you have the information, the impact on the reduction of the disestablishment on that unit, on the ability for you to steward those claims through the public service.
Yeah, we might invite Alex Chadwick to come up. This is her area. So yes, the establishment of the pay equity task force was a fixed 3-year amount of money, and that came to an end. And as a result of the progress that's been made in pay equity claims across the public service, it was deemed no longer necessary to have that function. Alex can speak to some of the specifics that you've asked.
Yeah, so the government has stated that it still remains committed to pay equity. There are still the same responsibilities on employers and unions that there were. There's been no change to the legislation. What has changed is the level of central support and governance of claims. As Heather has said, the decision was made by Cabinet that that could come to an end, the funding for that particular task force could come to an end, and that the responsibility for those claims lay primarily with the parties to those claims. So it was only ever an advisory function and a governance function that the Commission performed through that task force. So the essence of those claims still continue, they still progress as they did before, and the obligations on the parties are still the same.
Just supplementary on that. So you said that one of the factors in the disestablishment of the unit, and I appreciate that you've said it was for a limited period of time funding, but obviously there was a decision not to continue that as well. So what was the determining factor in deciding that the progress of pay equity claims was such that they wouldn't need ongoing stewardship through the Public Service Commission? What evidence or what was that based on when you made that decision? Or that decision was a factor in the
So the task force was initially established in 2018. There had been a number of changes to the legislation. Those changes were now 4 years in. There was a lot more knowledge in the system. There was many claims had actually been settled, whereas when the task force was started, there was very few. So there had been a lot of knowledge built up in the system. And it wasn't the Public Service Commission running those claims. Those claims were always run by the parties. There was just additional support provided at a central level in those early days. The decision was taken that the system had progressed to a level where that central support and guidance was no longer necessary.
And just final on that one, was that, and I know we've talked about consulting with different people, but was that consulted on with anyone before that the decision to disestablish that was made, given that pay equity claims are claims that are negotiated between public service employers and their trade unions? Were those people involved in that consulted before that decision was made, given you've said the justification was that the stewardship was no longer needed?
The decision that was made was that the funding came to an end because it was time limited. So there wasn't direct consultation with the parties to claims about that, because that didn't directly impact those claims. Those claims were to continue irrespective of the funding stopping for the task force.
So just to clarify, so did it end because the funding ended, or did it end because it wasn't needed?
The funding was determined that it was no longer needed, but it was also due to end anyway, and it wasn't renewed.
Okay, supplementary.
Yeah, just supplementary. So just to be clear, it had always been time limited
Yes,
funded?
always time
It was
limited.
never permanently allocated?
No.
Right, okay. And can I ask you just about that, because you make some commentary, I think it was in your annual report rather than the questions, I apologise if I'm wrong, about particularly with small organisations like yours, where the difference between pay equity looking at mean salaries versus median, because you might have one or two outliers. In this case, I mean, in the Commission's case, you've had a minister and a chief executive who are women, so it doesn't take huge numbers, I think, is what you see to actually change that. But the data is only representative of mean and not median. Do you have a sense of how you're tracking that maybe that data, as you said, the mean doesn't quite paint the picture, the median does to some extent, but what's your sense on how you're...
So I think what you're referring to is the measurement for the gender pay gap as opposed to pay equity, which is a slightly different process.
Looking at our side, yeah.
There are different ways of calculating the gender pay gap. We use the mean calculation in the public service that has reduced significantly since 2018.
But when you look at like-for-like roles in terms of pay equity, are they broad enough and comparable enough that you can just do a direct comparison and you don't have to factor anything else in?
I think you're confusing pay equity with gender pay gap. So pay equity is a process whereby you're alleging that there is sex-based undervaluation in an entire workforce. What you're referring to is whether or not men and women are paid the same for doing the same job, essentially.
No, sorry, the second part of that question was about the pay equity, not the gender pay parity. Are you able to find for the different departments, are there enough similar comparable roles that you can compare to achieve that pay equity?
Yes, I mean, we've certainly done an exercise throughout the whole public service of addressing pay gaps between same or similar roles. Every agency has been asked to do that work. They have done that. Those gaps have been closed, and that's what's contributed to the overall pay gap in the public service coming down significantly. So,
But there is comparability
in
across
roles.
agencies, if
Yes.
that's your question.
And so that gives you confidence that when you say that gap has been closed and that work stream is no longer required, you have that confidence that that's based on good data?
That's not the work stream that's been disestablished.
Pay equity, I'm talking about pay.
Yes, you're talking about pay
equity,
equity, not closing pay gaps. They're two different things.
No, sorry, the gap between public servants and the private sector is what I'm talking about. When the gap, you just said, when I asked about that, you looked at that and the gap had been closed. What gap?
We're talking about the pay gap within the public service, which actually has dropped significantly below the national pay gap. But we're talking about the pay gaps, the difference between what men and women are paid within the public service.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to go where men and women are, but that's fine. I think I've got what I'm after, which is that gap you're saying has been closed.
Okay.
Yep, and
It's been reduced, yeah.
if it's useful to members, we can get more data and
Yep.
perhaps just come back to you directly on that point.
Yep. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's dropped
Thank you,
down
Commissioner.
from about 12.6%
okay.
to 7.1%.
No, I'm just
That's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you.
I'm just conscious that we're going to have the minister who's just joined us now in the back row up soon. So we're in the quickfire part of the afternoon. We're going to go to Tom Rutherford and then we're going to go to Fran.
Yeah, Heather, in your opening remarks, you said that spend in the last year for consultants and contractors had come down from 13.1% to 8.9%. Why was it important for there to be a reduction on the spend on consultants and contractors?
Internationally, other jurisdictions, other public service, there's a benchmark about the appropriate insourcing and outsourcing.
What is that benchmark?
It sits around 12 to 10%, and the public service expenditure on consultants and contractors had increased quite significantly.
To what?
I think it was up. I need to check the number, but it was high. It was up near 15% higher. And so it was something that successive governments have looked to ensure that that balance stays appropriate, and that we have core capability within the public service to do our work, and that we use contractors where necessary. And it's clearly, defensible, spending additional money to bring in additional capability in that way. The concerted focus that we've had across the public service and looking at the appropriate insourcing, outsourcing, reducing that overall expenditure as part of our wider fiscal sustainability efficiency program in support of the government's priorities has brought that figure down. And we're expecting it to significantly exceed the government's target of 400 million.
Okay, thank you.
Francesca.
Commissioner, one of the outcomes in the strategic intentions is commitment to Māori and Te Tiriti. So I'm interested for you to, illuminate the committee with your understanding of how race contributes to structural inequities. Do you think it does? And what the role of the Public Service Commissioner is in overcoming these?
Heather, would you like to? Okay. And then I'll follow.
Of course, the public service has a really important role in supporting the Crown. So this has been codified in our Public Service Act 2020. The public service supports the Crown in its relationships with Māori under the treaty. And therefore we give advice on how to give effect to those treaty obligations, and we support the government with the implementation of their policies. Another core role of the public service is to build the capability of the public service to ensure it can fulfil that core purpose. We've had quite an active program of doing so in the last 5 to 6 years across a broad range of areas, working with Te Arawhiti and Te Puni Kōkiri on providing clear frameworks and guidance for how we go about that in a considered way. And as a result, we've seen an uplift in that capability, that knowledge and understanding. in the public service census that we ran for the first time in 2021, we now have a baseline measure of that capability. So how well people understand or their knowledge of the treaty, of Te Reo Māori and their use and their confidence of using that in the public service. That shows things like 73% of public servants value their knowledge of Te Reo Māori and wish to grow it. So having a workforce that is reflects and understands the community that it serves, in particular Māori communities, is really important for us to deliver those services to those communities.
Okay, I've just got a question before we invite the Minister of Finance up. The Public Service Commission's independent inquiry into potential breaches in and around data and personal information pertaining to Manurewa Marae. That was announced 6 months ago. Have you, Commissioner, got a deadline, a delivery line on when that report will be released or at least finished?
It is nearing completion, and we would hope, subject to getting one sort of final review, that it will be released in the next few weeks. We would hope by Christmas, but that's not a guarantee.
And are you able to comment on, why it's taking so long?
It has just been a very complicated, sensitive issue. It's worthy of the time spent to make sure that we get the answer right.
And the other public entities that are involved are Census New Zealand, the Electoral Commission, the New Zealand Police. Stats.
Yeah, look, as I said, it's complex. There's a number of voices to be listened to, and we've gone through this methodically. We remain confident of our ability to deliver in the not too distant future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But Minister, welcome. Oh. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister, for a 15-minute opportunity for you to present your thoughts on the financial year 23-24 and perhaps enlighten us in and around strategic intentions going forward. And then we'll open it up for questions from the members. So thank you.
Well, kia ora koutou katoa, and can I acknowledge colleagues, Mr Chair, and can I start by welcoming our new Public Service Commissioner, Sir Brian Roche, into the role, and I'd like to acknowledge the cross-party support that was received for his appointment. I think that's significant for a role of this stature. Look, in this past year, the government has asked a lot of the public service, and I want to acknowledge public service and all of the thousands of public servants in it have been working hard to deliver against our commitments to drive greater value for money and to improve frontline services for New Zealanders. We are, of course, in a tough economic environment, and the government came into office at a time of serious financial challenge. We simply could not continue to live beyond our means. Public service has reorganised itself around the government's priorities and is focused more on delivering value for money services for New Zealanders. And I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of public servants in stepping up to that challenge. Just for more context for the committee, the government's focus in the public service in the past year has been in 3 areas. 1, driving value from government spending, a particular focus on lowering expenditure on contractors and consultants. 2nd, shifting resources from the back office to the front line. And 3rd, ensuring that the work of the public service is organised to deliver against the government's 9 priority targets. And all 3 areas are aimed at a more efficient and higher-performing public service. Just on each of those points briefly, first, we are on track to reduce contractor and consultant spending across the public sector by $400 million a year. That is a great success. We are committed to having a highly skilled permanent public service rather than outsourcing significant work to consultants. That gravy train is over. With the second point, we set out to move back office resources into frontline roles, and our workforce data is already starting to show that this is occurring. In the past year, more than 1,000 new corrections officers were hired. There has been an increase at Oranga Tamariki, the Ministry for Vulnerable Children, of 242 additional workers, particularly focused in frontline roles in youth justice facilities. And the Inland Revenue Department has seen an increase in 361 staff, particularly focused on delivering things such as the family boost payment and ensuring compliance with people's tax obligations. At the same time, across the public service as a whole, the number of service delivery roles, such as contact centre workers, increased 17%. Inspectors and regulatory officers have increased 6%, and social health and education workers have gone up 1.5%. We're making progress. At the same time, there's been an 11% reduction in the number of clerical and administrative roles and an 8% reduction in policy jobs. We are doing what we said we would do. To the third point, delivery plans have been developed and are being implemented for each government target, and quarterly reports on progress against the targets are being released. Just a few quick other points before I wrap up and take your questions, which I know is the most important part. The government is, as you know, taking a new approach to public service workforce issues. A new government workforce policy statement was introduced in August. It has a strong emphasis on fiscal sustainability and performance. And you will be aware that I've also asked the Public Service Commission to update its flexible working guidance. I can update you that agencies and unions have been consulted on updated guidance, and it will most likely be released before Christmas. The committee may or may not also be aware that trust and confidence in the public service, according to the quarterly survey Kiwi's Count, which canvasses the opinions of New Zealanders, is currently at 59%. This is 8 percentage points higher than the highest pre-COVID level, which was 51%. For comparison, trust in the private sector is currently 45%. So I think those numbers speak to the dedication and commitment of our public servants. Finally, I do want to just say something about job losses in the public service. It is not easy for anyone who loses their job in any circumstances. There has understandably been a lot of media attention on public service job losses. I think, however, at times this has been accompanied by some very unclear reporting. It's worth noting that public service roles peaked in the December quarter and then decreased by just over 2,000 roles in the 6 months to June. That is the real FTE reduction up to 30 June. It is a much smaller number than what has been reported. And the reason for this is that about a third of what has been reported in the media have been unfilled vacancies. And I think that's significant because New Zealanders need to understand that many government agencies were holding vacancies open and using the funds intended for those roles for other purposes. And we have put a stop to that practice.
Okay.
I'm happy, there are a number of other factors to do with the media reporting of these numbers, but I'm happy now to take your questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. Camilla Billett.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Minister. And I just note we've only got 15 minutes with you today, and you've used 5 minutes for your introductory remarks.
As is customary.
Well, I wondered if you would be willing to stay a further 5 minutes to allow us to have enough time to have our questions, considering the short nature of this hearing. Anyway,
she started a couple of minutes late, so
but
we'll
no,
give a couple more minutes.
I've been keeping time and it was 5 minutes. Anyway, to not use further time, it would be great if you could stay longer. We'll get straight to the point. You have overseen a number of cuts within the public service in your time as Minister. These are roles that you have indicated to New Zealanders would not affect frontline service delivery, but just to note a few of them. 755 roles at the Ministry of Education, 941 roles at the Ministry of Social Development, 1,400 roles in Te Whatu Ora, a considerable number of roles that are no longer available to serve New Zealanders. What assurances do you have and can you give to New Zealanders that the core public service and the frontline delivery has not been affected by these extensive cuts?
Look, thank you for your question. As I said in my introductory remarks, we are committed to frontline service delivery. And in that context, for both the education and health workforce, as I just shared with you, overall, we've seen an increase in public service workers. Those are roles that are, for example, teachers in classrooms rather than people working at the Ministry of Education. Those are roles such as increasing numbers of nurses rather than people working in policy roles. And that is exactly what we said we would do, because having watched the public service grow about 30% in numbers over a period of just 6 years, it was our view that not enough of those resources were getting into the service delivery that New Zealanders pay tax in order to support.
Supplementary, was it Camilla, or we'll go to Francis?
Yeah, supplementary. So I appreciate your comments, but do you have any evidence, or have you asked the Public Service Commission to do any testing of that assertion that the delivery on core frontline services has not been affected by these substantive cuts?
Well, I don't need to ask the Public Service Commission to do a special report on that, because we've set 9 government targets which we are measuring ourselves against. And I would put to you that in the previous 6 years, there wasn't very good accountability for funding, delivering
about
results.
this
And
year.
I'm going to address your question. So if we take education as a really important example, possibly the most important investment we can make for the future productivity of our economy. In these past few years, we have seen educational achievement, particularly for children from our lower socioeconomic communities, declining rates of literacy and numeracy. Our government has come in and instantly introduced structured literacy into our classrooms, a new program of numeracy, rewriting the curriculum, and being very clear that we will hold ourselves accountable for the achievement of students in schools, not simply how many policy analysts we hire at the Ministry for Education. And that is the approach that we intend to take across the board. I look to, for example, the area of law and order, where again, we unashamedly said that our focus is going to be on ensuring that New Zealanders can feel safer in our communities, not only by ensuring that additional frontline police officers are hired and funded, but also ensuring that those who commit significant or violent crimes can face custodial sentences. And that is why we've increased the corrections workforce significantly, because we don't want there to be a situation where New Zealanders who have significantly victimised others, who pose a danger to others, aren't put in prison because there aren't enough beds for them. That is the wrong way around. So across the board, we are measuring ourselves on the achievement we deliver, not just simply how many people we hire.
I've just got a sup over here from Tim Costley.
Thank you, Minister. And I think you've in part answered it, but my question, thinking about, as you're asked about assurances and that frontline services to Kiwis aren't impacted by the changing personnel. And we heard actually before you joined us from Heather that a lot of these numbers of disappearing things were actually vacant positions. So they weren't actually people doing anything. So just to bring it into context, we were told it was under 1,000, not the up to 10,000 that's been quoted. But what assurances do you have that as you step into this role, halfway through this financial year that we're looking at, that the significant increase over the last 6 years of both funding and personnel was actually delivering? Because the question is, if you take some away, it must be getting worse. But was it actually getting better with significant increases?
Yeah, look, what I can share with you is that in the 5 years to June 2023, there was a 27% increase in the number of people employed by public service departments and agencies. That's 13,387 more, representing a 4.5% annual increase. Now, people's reflections will vary. But my experience over that same 5 years was that New Zealanders were continually saying to me, why isn't the government delivering better results for me and my family? Whether that was their surgery waiting time, whether that was the achievement that their children were getting at school, whether that was the safety that they felt in their own community. So our job as a government is to ensure that resources are actually delivering results that people can see and feel in their own families and communities. That has meant that we are making that shift from the back office to the front line. In this past year for which we have data, you've got a year of two halves. There was a significant growth up to the change of government. When the government changed, we saw a 3.3% reduction in the overall size of the public sector workforce. That's around 2,162 roles fewer.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Francisco.
I've got a sup on Camilla's question. Can I ask that?
Yeah, no, please.
Yeah. You've mentioned about how one of the things that you're proud of doing is shifting resources from the back line to the front line. But in the past, when you've been asked to define front line, you've said and I'm quoting from the previous estimates, it can be difficult to define, but you know it when you see it. But how can you say there's been an increase in roles when you've actually not defined what a frontline role is?
Just because of the data I've taken you through, Francisco, where you look at those 1,000 extra corrections officers, you look at the more than 240 additional people hired at Oranga Tamariki to work with our most vulnerable children, where you look at the efforts of the police force to hire more frontline officers, but also at that granular level in the data. When we do that breakdown in the public workforce data, that shows quite a clear shift in roles, which I would characterise as frontline. So contact centre workers, often the front line port of call for a New Zealander trying to get information about a public service, they increased 17%. I think about inspectors and regulatory officers, again, at that real front line of ensuring that our borders are safe. They've increased 6%. Social health and education workers, that's gone up 1.5%. At the same time, roles that I would normally characterise as back office, policy, for example, policy advice to ministers, there's been an 8% reduction there. Roles such as clerical and administrative roles, which are really important roles, but which we should always be seeking to see if we across the public service can be driving efficiency in, they've reduced by 11%.
Okay, thank you. Have you got a primary question?
Yep.
Members will be very excited that we're getting the 15 minutes, full 15 minutes of Q&A. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. And thank you for your engagement. Minister, you said in the forward of the 2024-2028 Public Service Commission strategic intentions that the information on strategic intentions is consistent with the policies and performance expectations of the government. Does that mean that the removal of strengthening the relationship between Māori and Crown and achieving diversity in the workforce and inclusiveness of the public service as overarching priorities as compared to the previous strategic intentions is reflective of your government's approach?
Well, the Public Service Commission and the public service as a whole always has a host of priorities, and they continue to include, for example, including that our workforce represents a broad range of New Zealanders and is able to engage with people from our diverse ethnic communities, our diverse many communities. It also includes, of course, ensuring that our public service is capable of effectively engaging with Māori and with properly putting in place the obligations placed on us through Te Tiriti o Waitangi. That remains the case. But as a new government coming in, our message to the Public Service Commission and to the public service as a whole was very clear that we wanted to drive greater value for money, that we wanted to drive greater performance against outcome targets, and that we wanted the public service to orient itself towards those things. If I can make an observation, one of the things that public servants often say to me is the most difficult thing for them is when ministers or our minister give them 25 things to do, because then how do they know what is the most important thing to do? One of the things we've been very fixed on as a government is narrow it down clearly to the things you really want to shift the dial on so that we can demonstrate progress to New Zealanders. And our approach across a range of documents reflects that.
Okay, one more.
So out of 1,500 Asian staff at NB, only one is in a tier 1 to 3 managerial position. So that seems to me that diversity should be a priority for this government, but it's been downgraded in importance by not being an overarching priority anymore. Does that concern you?
Look, I think that you are joining two dots in a way that isn't necessarily fair. I think there has been a long-standing challenge with getting the level of Asian representation in senior roles that would be proportionately representative of our population. This is something I've actually talked to the Commission about. I've asked them why that is and what we should be doing there, because it's my experience that there are significant numbers of incredibly capable Asian New Zealanders who I'd love to see in those senior public servant roles. But to say that which is a long-standing challenge, is the result of a change of government, I think is undrawing the bow too wide.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of quick fire questions, because I know that you'll probably have a meeting at 5 o'clock that you need to get to in the Beehive. Tom.
Thank you. Ms. Baggett made a comment in her opening remarks that she had seen the spend on consultants and contractors come down from 13.1% to 8.9% to the end of June. Why is that a priority for you as a minister?
Look, that's a significant achievement that has been achieved, and I really want to commend the Commission on their role in providing guidance and working with agencies to achieve it. It's important for a couple of reasons. The first is that I think there had become a habit under the last government of when advice was needed in a rush or a hurry, or was seen as significantly complex or difficult, to say, well, we can't trust our own agency to do it, let's go and pay, often, frankly, one of the big four consultancies to do it. And there really was a gravy train. I'll never forget sitting next to a partner at one of those consultancies on the plane, asking him how business was during the last government, and he said, we face unconstrained demand. That was the environment they were operating in. And I think that's wrong, because actually the public service should be building capability, knowledge and expertise in-house. The second part of it, of course, is that it becomes very expensive. And the judgment that I formed coming in was that there were a lot of reports by consultants sitting on shelves, not actually resulting in action for New Zealanders. So by having a discipline of, in the first instance, public agencies being asked to deliver work themselves and only resorting to consultancy advice where particular subject matter knowledge or expertise that goes beyond that can be built internally is needed, you've seen those numbers come down. The public service is capable of a lot more than it has been credited with in previous years.
Very good. Now, Andy Foster, you're on vote of thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. Three quickies, just which I've asked Sir Brian already about. It's just the culture of the organisation or the organisations in terms of being a service culture of how we're here to help, as opposed to sometimes being bureaucratic and being unhelpful. We're seeing the right kind of culture there. Secondly, the issue around neutrality, and we've seen the odd occasions when we've seen pushback, possibly not so much in the core public service, but in other parts of the public sector, which seems to be, don't like the way the government's going, therefore we would be difficult. So just that we're getting the culture that we want there in terms of neutrality and professionalism. And sorry, the other one is just that the public sector is proactively focused on becoming more efficient and effective. And if it sees itself that there are ways of doing things better, that it will alert ministers to that, say, we think we can do better here without the same level of resources. So the three areas.
Yeah, well, look, I preface my remarks by saying different ministers will have had different experiences. I've had the experience in my roles working with the New Zealand Treasury, with the Public Service Commission, with the Social Investment Agency, and also with the Ministry for the Environment and the Climate Change role. And in my dealings, what I have found is that what is required in order to get the public service focused on a new government's priorities is real clarity in our expectations. And so that is, as I said earlier, making those priorities clear. And it's been my experience that sometimes work will keep chugging along that is actually a low priority for the government unless the minister makes it clear that that can be deprioritised in order to put resources towards more important work. And that is something that we need to hold ourselves accountable for. The second thing that I would say is that I think that having a culture of professionalism, neutrality and integrity is something that even the government's most vociferous critics would like to see from their public service, because that is actually what means that a public service can withstand changes of government. So I think there are always mistakes that are made and that need to be learned from. And it's been my experience that by and large, public servants wish to conduct their roles with the utmost of integrity and with neutrality. It's our job to give them the priorities, to be clear in our expectations and hold agencies accountable for delivering against them.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's probably a good place to end. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Heather. Thank you to all your senior team. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.